So indeed, this track is called Current Status of SMW and Future IDs, New IDs. This is pretty much in the new IDs area, so that's why I called it a vision. What I'd like to share with you today is some ideas that we've taken from actually using Semantic Media Wiki in our practice as an architecture consultancy, and some of the things that we encounter there that we think we should be able to solve by having, it's giving some kind of feedback, doesn't it?
Just
yeah? Even more sound, okay. So I'd like to share some ideas that we have, which I think we should put on the agenda as a community, but I'd really like to have your opinion on that, your ideas. So I would like to get some feedback whether you recognize the ideas that we present here, and whether this is indeed something that we should strive to obtain as a community, something that we could put further down the line into Semantic Media Wiki as something new, something that would be cool to have. And it is really about versioning, basically. It's about versioning knowledge that is in your wiki, and what can you do with that? What kind of use cases does that additionally give you, and how can you treat knowledge throughout time? That's the idea here. So to give you a bit of background on who I am, I work for RTXL. We're a Dutch architecture consultancy specialized in enterprise architecture. And we started using Semantic Media Wiki first internally, later also for our customers, basically as an enterprise architecture repository. We recently launched a new label called Excellent Knowledge, which is a broader knowledge management label where we use Semantic Media Wiki as a knowledge management platform for many of our customers who have some knowledge management needs that we think we can really support by the Semantic Media Wiki tools that we have. Now, some of you have seen what we do with Semantic Media Wiki and enterprise architecture. So this is a layout of an enterprise architecture repository, but this boils down to things like this. We have all kinds of architectural things. We have decisions, we have principles, we have requirements, we have systems, we have services, things like that. All these things we put in this repository, in this Semantic Wiki, and we make connections between them so that we get a coherent view on what the architecture of an organization is. Now, most of the things we do is in the public sector and in the semi-public sector. So we are usually acting in a really many stakeholder environment. So there's a lot of people that we interact with, there's a lot of people that we have to sort of involve in the process, and then you get quite a complicated process. So down there is the architect, the one that's at first interacting with experts and peers to prepare architectural decisions. Usually you will find there's an advisory board with representatives from different stakeholders that get the architectural decisions and then prepare an advice. There will be typically a steering committee that has formal decision power. So this advisory board will give an advice on the architectural decision to take, and then there will be a formal decision from the steering committee. So this is very much process-driven with a lot of formality in it. And if it's, again, public sector, something in the architecture that touches not only upon stakeholders that are part of this process, but the public in general, you could even have something like a public consultation, where the architecture is published, and then people, the general public, everyone who is affected is asked, can you give some feedback on what we're doing here, how it, what kind of impact it has for you, and whether you have any comments on what we're doing and whether we should steer a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. So this, as you can see, it's quite a heavy process. And we use wikis here, but at the same time, we sometimes encounter some kind of tension between, let's say, the old way of working, publishing things in documents and just saying that's the document that you should read, and doing things in a wiki. So there's a lot of pros with using wikis, ease of use. We can browse, we can query, we can quite easily, with a low threshold, engage other stakeholders. There's a live knowledge base, it's always up to date, so to say. But at the same time, it's a little bit intangible because it's always in flux, right? If I look at the wiki now and I look at the wiki tomorrow, there might be changes. And I'm not really sure what the changes are. Whereas if I publish documents, we can have a formal status, we can approve them, we can stamp them, we can have a whole committee look at them and say, okay, this is indeed what we want. There can be editing procedures, there can be some sort of release management, and it feels quite tangible, although once you publish a document, tomorrow it will be outdated. So that's the tension that we are operating in. And well, as far as we're concerned, wikis are the way to go, right? Because you can engage the stakeholders and it is always up to date. But still, we have to take into account the more formal things of saying this is the kind of, this is the version of the architecture that we want to distribute and that we want to publish and that others should use in their process. Now, we've been looking into managing versions, but because that's basically what we want to be able to achieve. And there are a couple of things that are out there. Of course, you have the page history. There's an extension called approved revisions. There's semantic history, semantic watch list. You can put versions in properties in your wiki itself, of course. And let's just briefly look at what we have there. So you could say, well, if I have a wiki, I have versioning, because I can just look at the page history and I can go back in time, right? Well, that's true, but if you go to a previous revision, then all your semantic queries will just give you the most up-to-date result. So if I go back to April 11, 2011, and there's an ask query, an inline query somewhere on the page, it will give me today's results. Well, that's not really what I want. So luckily, there's approved revisions. This gives you two states in your wiki. And I don't think it's readable, but just below the title it says, this is the approved version of this page. It is not the latest version. So there are two versions here. The one we are seeing here is the approved one. Someone has said, this is what we want to publish, basically. And then there's a draft version that is being developed while all the general public just sees this one. That's already pretty cool. All the queries in this wiki will give you the approved results. And if you go into the page history here, you can see some additional stuff. So there's a little star there that indicates the revision that has been approved. And you can see that there have been different revisions afterwards that are still, they still have to be inspected and to be approved. This already brings us a lot of the things that we want to achieve. And actually, we're using this extension quite a lot now in different architecture repositories. But there's more that has to do with history and time. So there's this extension, semantic history. Now, what this does is not work on page revisions, but it gives you an idea of the history of page properties. So you can sort of go back in time by querying the metadata of the page. And there's semantic watch list, which acts like a regular wiki watch list, but then also monitors semantic properties. So if some semantic property changes, you will get an email and it says the name of this person or the address of this person has changed. Instead of it says the page about this person has changed. So it gives you a little bit finer granularity there. And of course, you can exploit semantic properties themselves to record things about versions. So you can introduce a version attribute for each page. You can do something with states. So you can, for instance, if you're talking about decisions, you can say this is a tentative decision. This has been decided. It's proved obsolete. And you can also take the strategy that you take different versions of something. So we have Windows version 7 and Windows version 8, and there are different pages. So we would have a Windows 7 and a Windows 8 page. So there are already some things to work with versions and with versioning in the context of Semantic Media Wiki, but still, it's not enough. So why do we feel this is not enough? Basically, what you want to be able to do is to look at things that have relations to each other. And if I'm looking at a particular version or revision of a page, then the queries that are on that page, I want them to give the results that are related to that particular revision of that page. So if I'm looking at version 1 of some system component, for instance, and that version 1 was related to version 1 of a particular software system. So I had my laptop and I had Microsoft Windows version 8. And then in a later version of that combination of things, it's not Windows 7, but it's Windows 8. I want this connection to be queryable. I want this connection to be maintained, basically. And that means that any version of or revision of a page that you have in the wiki only makes sense if you put it in the context of the related revisions that surround it. Now, what this means is that we need something different than what we have now. So what we need, and I don't know if you recognize this, but this is quite an old movie. It's Doc and Marty McFly who have invented this DeLorean to travel through time, right? And I think we need something like that within our wikis. And I would like to take this a little bit out of the area of architectural knowledge management, because that's quite abstract and that's what we're doing. But I think it has, it also benefits others in their practice and in what they use the semantic wiki for. So just a quick question: who recognizes something like this? You're reading a page in a wiki. In this case, it's semantic forms, but I could have taken any other extension or any other revision of software. And you see something written there and you say, cool, that's really what I want. That's really what I need in my wiki. I wonder if it's in the version of the extension that I have deployed. There is, on such a page, no way of seeing that information. Well, you could find it if you went browsing through the history or went to another page that has versioning information about the different releases. Just the other day, while we were doing the tutorial, there was some confusion because someone was looking at the Semantic Media Wiki documentation, semanticmediawiki.org, and there was nothing he could find about the string type. But there are still versions of Semantic Media Wiki out there that have the string type. It has been obsoleted in the later revisions, but if you're working with 1.6 or 1.7, you still want to have that information. So basically you would want to look at the documentation version 1.7. So I think this is something that goes beyond the type of use cases that we have, and I think there are more use cases that this can be used for. So basically what we want to be able to do is, think about this. Suppose we could travel through our wiki to a certain point in time, right? To a certain date timestamp, or to a certain event. What would that make possible? Well, for instance, we could show the documentation for a particular release of a piece of software, an extension or media wiki or whatever you're maintaining in your wiki. We could go back in time. We could display the contents of the wiki as it was on a particular previous date. We could show, in our case, one of the formally approved revisions of an architecture. We could also switch between different stages of architectural knowledge in the enterprise architecture repository. So we could, for instance, distinguish the current state of the organization with the state of the organization that we want to transfer to, and would start to compare things like that. And all the time, this wouldn't just be looking at a single page, but you would be looking at a wiki as a whole in a coherent state somewhere in the past. Right? So if you have semantic media queries, they would return results that are consistent with the revision that you're looking at. So think for a minute, just think about what this could mean for the things you are doing with Semantic Media Wiki, whether that could benefit you, right? And share this, because I'm really interested in what you guys think this could bring to you. And I'll get back to that at the end of this talk. I hope to have some time to have a discussion then. But I think it's also good to look at other areas in which things like this play a big role. And one of the useful analogies that we can draw is with software revision control. So if you are a developer, you will instantly recognize this. If not, Software developers, especially the large groups that are contributing to a shared code base, think open source development, think Semantic Media Wiki. They use something called revision control, software control. Examples are CVS, but that's really old-fashioned, Subversion, Git. And what these type of systems do is they make it possible to work on different revisions at the same time from different perspectives. So what you see down here is a green line of different revisions of the source code. You have revision 1, 4, 10, 12, 14, that's called the trunk. That's the main development. That's what you see if you just look at the software code repository. And then you see little branches springing off. So we have revision 2 and 3. They are sort of a parallel track, and then they're merged back again to the trunk. So someone was working on the software while not influencing what happens on the trunk, not influencing what happens on the main version of the software here. And then you see at revision 4, there's a purple one down there. It's a snapshot. So we can always go back to that release, because that would have probably been a release, to see what Semantic Media Wiki 1.9 looked like. Right? And because we want to maintain that version, we see revision 6, 9, 11, and 15 branch off and go in a different branch. And then we see some merging and some interesting patterns there that probably won't happen that often in practice. But it's about the idea of having snapshots and parallel branches of things that are evolving. We can use that for knowledge as well. So we'll be able to tag the knowledge in the wiki. We would basically just take a snapshot and say, what we have here, right now, that's what we are releasing as version 1 of whatever we are putting in our wiki. And there will be a label put to all the revisions on that date and time throughout the wiki, so we could always go back to that position. If you look at our practice, some things that we would be able to do then, we would be able to produce versions of the architecture and have different views for different stakeholders. So we could look at what it is right now, what it could be in the future, and how it was before today. We could be branching knowledge, so have these little parallel tracks. So we would be able to temporarily branch off a page and just try some things and look at how it evolves and whether that is really what we want. We could separate different stages. We could allow independent development of parts of the wiki. We would be able to merge things back. So if you have these parallel tracks, you would be able to sort of bring the knowledge back to the trunk of the wiki. We would be able to integrate different revisions to the approved revision. We will be able to support all kinds of knowledge evolution in this way. And just to give you an impression of what this might look like, here we are looking at one of these wikis that contains enterprise architecture knowledge. And there I've put a slider there. It says 29 October 2013, that's today. There's a couple of revisions marked there, version 1, version 1.1, version 2. Now what I envision is that we would be able to just slide this back to a previous release, and the whole wiki just changes, because we're now looking at version 1.1. And behind this page there will be queries that show you the application components, the system software, and whatever is in there. And all the answers to these queries would be according to version 1.1. And once we go back again to today, the answer to the queries would also change. So what would we need to get there? I think that the idea of tags and timestamps, of snapshots and timestamps, to be able to pinpoint a revision of your wiki and say, I want to be able to go back to that time, to that moment in time, and to see what the world looked like at that particular date. I think that's an important thing. And I hope to get some feedback whether you think there is some worth of that in your practice as well. But I think there's already quite some things out there that we could use to get there. So we have the logic from approved revisions to return semantics based on the revision that you selected. One thing that we would have to do to enable this is to store historical property data. So right now, property data is stored per page. What we would need to be able to do this is store this data per revision, basically. And this might have some interesting implications or maybe complications regarding database size and caching, and well, you can imagine. Would this be part of Semantic Media Wiki core? Could we put it in an extension? The latter would be preferable, of course, but if you look at the type of queries that you might be able to put, it would be something like, give me all the thingies that have foo as bar with a timestamp of a particular date, or with a tag or a snapshot of version 1. And I think that maybe a good next step would be to engage the community and see if we can put up something like a request for comments, right? To see if we can bring together different use cases that would be supported by this, and also investigate a bit what the technical issues and technical complications would be if we're going to do this. And then from that point on, try and make a decision to see if we are able to, as a community, do something like this. I would like to see this happen. I hope you too. And if you would like to be involved, I'm more than happy to share some further ideas with you. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess it's time for question and comments.
Hi. Hello. I just had one quick correction first. The string data type was actually removed in SMW 1.9, not 1.8.
Sorry about that.
The bigger I see an issue with this, which I think also exists for that semantic history extension you mentioned, which is that it to some extent takes away the wiki nature of the whole thing. In that, if you have some old revision that reflects what things were like at that point, and there's an error in it, then you essentially can't correct it.
I don't agree. I think you can correct it, but at that point in time, if you really want to look at how it was at that point in time, the error will be there. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't correct it in the sense of being able to query based on the date of that revision. So to me personally, I've thought about this this whole issue to some extent. To me, it seems like this whole issue is somewhat outside the scope of Semantic Media Wiki, and that would require turning MediaWiki into something more like a distributed version control system, like a Git, where you can truly have different branches and keep working on a certain branch of a page and so forth. So that's my view of it. I mean, it could be done, but I think it would be a bigger issue than SMW per se.
Okay.
What's the Wiki Data perspective on that?
I can't answer that, but maybe someone else can. Anyone from Wiki Data who can answer that question?
As a matter of fact, we have.
Wikidata does not have a specific solution to this. Being able to have fork and merge or branch and merge logic in a wiki is something I've been wanting for quite a while, for individual pages as well as for the entire thing. That would be very, very nice, and I think it would be feasible on the page level. Having versioning and branching that would also work for querying the database, that is going to be extremely difficult to do without creating an enormous amount of additional data in the database. By enormous, I mean duplicating the entire database for every edit on any page. If there is an efficiently working database engine that already has support for something like that, then it might be feasible. But implementing this on top of MySQL or something, maybe there's someone brave enough to try it, but I'm very, very doubtful.
I think Marcus has a reaction to that.
Yeah, I kind of agree. There are database engines that do this kind of thing, but you need to have an enormous amount of structure sharing in place to be able to store that without really duplicating the data every time somebody makes a very small edit. So it is really like developing a new data management backend if you want that. And it might be feasible to use something existing for this purpose, because people are getting interested in that also in the domain of business analytics, where you are very interested in historical data and running queries over your customers last year and your customers this year. And this is very interesting to people in many areas. So maybe we will have that technology at some point to use it.
Yeah, and don't we have the abstraction layer of different storages?
Yes, that's the thing where, again, it's not sufficient what we do, because the abstraction layer doesn't include any time information. So it doesn't even allow you to specify what you wanted, even if we had a database backend that could store this. Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're proposing makes me think of the evolution of Wiki Data, for example, and facts such as, Ronald Reagan was married 3 times, so the entry for Ronald Reagan may show 3 different spouses, but in fact, he was not married to the 3 of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I was just looking up this kid that was born to the royalty in England, Prince George of Cambridge, right? Because it just so happens that since his birth date, all of the facts to be added about him will be incrementally added to Wikipedia, right? You could imagine if he happens to marry twice in the past, as his grandfather did, that you would have captured actually the period of time when those facts happened,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
So we can't go back in time and edit Wikipedia in time for Ronald Reagan's entry. But I wonder, this is what makes me think that here you're talking about version control and trunks and merging and so on, but it kind of makes me think about how this would relate to capturing the future as it evolves, so that we can actually start to qualify facts that are added through time.
Yeah, and I think that's the main idea. It's not about going back in time and editing things in history, because that probably wouldn't make sense. But being able to look at a certain point in time and to which person was that person married at that point in time, that's the type of question you want to be able to answer. And just knowing that he or she had 2 spouses, that's not always the right answer to the question that you have. Any more before we have lunch?
Yeah. And actually the use cases of such feature are welcome too, not only the descriptions of the obstacles we'll have.
Like others, I've also thought about this problem. It's really personally very fascinating. My own approach to solving it, though, is based upon an ontology. The notion being that I distinguish between, I'm very grammatical in my ontology, so I have properties, for instance, that are was versus is.
Right, yeah.
Or has versus had, so that you could find out, you could distinguish very quickly on the query who a person is currently married to, as opposed to when a person. You don't have to do any data arithmetic during the query process if you can make that distinction.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe some thoughts from me is there are actually stores that use not triples for storing the data, but rather quadruples or sets of a bigger size. So you have your subject, your relation, and the object, and then some metadata like when it was introduced, when it was changed, by whom, and so on. So probably using this kind of database as the backend can help here.
Well, that's the idea. It's nothing new, actually. I mean, you see this in different areas, also in software revision control, but you can point at very many areas in which this is a problem, and sometimes it's already solved.
I'm working in science, so this sort of versioning will be quite critical to since if we change the data set, the result will be different. So
Yeah.
this is really a matter for us. So we traditionally make a freeze, so in freeze, or we make a snapshot, and we are using this version always, or this sort of things. We have been using that. So that's why in this context, it would be nice if Semantic Media Wiki or Wiki Data can support this sort of things, and I mean, but still.